Now, back to America's Workforce. Here's Ed Flash Farrens.
And don't forget, you can check us out on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. Twitter handle, real simple, AWF Union Podcast. All right, let's go to our live line. Welcome back to the show. It's been a while. Gina Walsh is her name. She's Deputy Director of the Insulators, proud sponsor of America's Workforce. Mechanical Insulators, LMCT.org. She's here to talk about Climate Jobs Illinois. And Gina is a former state legislator and a state senator out of the great state of Missouri, the state that defeated right to work a couple of years ago. We need more states to defeat right to work. Hey, Gina, welcome back to the show. How are we doing today?
We're great. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Good. Well, this is exciting news because I remember we did a segment with Pete Almini. My gosh, it was probably 9-10 months ago talking about Climate Jobs Illinois, and I guess we've got passage of some legislation. This is a good thing here. Why don't you explain to our listeners what this is all about? Because I know it's exciting for you. It's exciting for, obviously, a lot of unions because there's going to be a lot of unions participating in this. So let's start at the beginning here. What is Climate Jobs Illinois?
Climate Jobs Illinois is a coalition of unions. We have members from the IBEW. Our executive board has several IBEW members. There's myself from our LMCT. We have Bill Mangian from our local in Chicago, the Insulators Local 17. LIUNA participates, the ironworkers, the operators, the teachers federations. There's over 22 members on the executive board, and our sole purpose is to make sure that when Illinois is trying to transition into a carbon-free society, that working men and women across that state are not forgotten, along with their good, well-paying union jobs with benefits.
So it's to make sure that we've got legislation that pinpoints what you just said. I'm reading that it's what over 900 pages in that bill. Is that right?
It is over 900 pages in that bill. But when you have a lot of bills are like that, Flash, but you're working on a pointed area in the bill. So a lot of it is current legislation.
All right.
Right. So we're amending on to current legislation in the Illinois Power Association bill. But we just wanted to make sure that our members, we have several nuclear plants in Illinois, people that work in those plants, in our construction areas. We wanted to make sure we weren't forgotten and our jobs weren't forgotten. And we were successful. The whole purpose was to ensure that labor's issues are included in any legislation the General Assembly would pass to achieve a carbon-free economy.
And Gina, let's talk about this transition because, as you know, I mean, there's still a number of fossil fuel plants. You touched on nuclear. Now, how is this transition going to happen? Because there's people at these facilities, fossil fuel, nuclear, as I mentioned, that are probably wondering, I don't know, I got a good job, I got good benefits, and I don't know about what the future holds. And we're hearing a lot of stories that maybe I'm going to have to work for less money. Talk to me about that part. I would imagine this is all contained in the legislation. Can you speak to that?
Well, and I'm one of those people. I did a lot of work in coal-generated plants over my career when I was working with the tools, and a lot of that work I did in Illinois. A lot of those plants are now closing in Illinois or are slated to be closed. And part of the argument was there were a few municipal coal-burning plants that were slated to be closed as well should this legislation pass. But they made amendments for those, so to speak, and worked into there that they have until, I believe, 2035 to become carbon-free. You know, technology changes every day. Years ago, it was the scrubbers they put on some of these coal burners that help them burn cleaner. Mm-hmm. So the technology can change, and there's 3 plants, I believe, that have the ability to remain open. One of them right not too far from where I live. I've toured that plant. My daughter has worked in that plant. and they made an exception for that and a couple other municipals across the state of Illinois to keep them open as long as they meet requirements that are set up by the bill.
I see.
So, we do earn our living in these plants, and it's going to be a tough transition, but it's going to happen with or without us, and I think it's best that it happens with us and that we're part of the solution.
Well, can you talk to us about what went into this legislation as far, you mentioned how labor was a big component and all that, and there had to be a tug of war going on. Again, change is not easy. There's pushback on that. Can you speak to what happened when?
There was a lot of back and forth and a lot of pushback between different groups, but this was compromise between a lot of different unions, a lot of folks in the clean energy industry, and a lot of advocacy groups. This bill has some of the strongest labor standards in the country on wind and solar developments. Project labor agreements are required on all utility-scale wind and solar projects, and prevailing wages for all non-residential clean energy projects. It also has in their block programs funding to procure renewable energy certificates, which are tax credits, for distributed generation projects installed on public schools. And that was part of the section that I worked on, the carbon-free schools, that when you move into this transition, oftentimes we talk about the building's insulation and the building's envelope, but when you talk about that, nobody ever talks about the mechanical insulation. And if you're not making sure that those systems are in check or installed properly or installed at all, then everything you did to secure that building envelope is going up through the roof of that building. So there is a section in there that requires that a mechanical insulation inspection be done on all of these projects as part of the qualifications for the RECs in this, which is good for us.
Yeah.
So now which is good for my industry in particular. There's sections in there for electric vehicles, charging stations. There's over $700 million in subsidies for Byron, Dresden, and Braidwood, which are three of the nuclear plants in Illinois. And that's Illinois' primary source of clean energy right now. Mm-hmm. So we need to keep those plants running, and we need to secure those jobs. Those people need to know that their future is secure.
You mentioned heat and frost insulators and the mechanical insulation. Any idea on how many jobs could be created with that component alone, or is it kind of premature at this stage to figure that out?
It's a little premature, and right now they're in the rulemaking process, but I can tell you every summer that I can remember in the 40 years that I worked on the tools, every summer there's a big push wherever you were for the schoolwork to get finished before the kids come back to school. Schools pass bond issues, and then they have this money for infrastructure or to revamp their schools or rebuild a new school. And you come in and you're under the gun to get it finished. All the crafts are to get it ready and secure and clean and safe for our students to return in August. And there's a very short window. A lot of times they don't leave till the first week of June, and you have to have this work done by the second week of August, and it's a big undertaking, but it's a lot of jobs. I know, at least in the Midwest where I worked, so I'm sure it's the same everywhere.
Yeah. That's why you need the best workers and the most highly trained.
Right.
Yeah, most highly trained workers.
The training is the key, and you've heard me say it before. I'm really proud of the training that these individual unions and organizations provide, and in most cases, in all cases, it's free. Mm-hmm. It's free training, and it's the best training. We provide the training to our own members. It's no cost to taxpayers.
Yeah.
Which I think is phenomenal.
So many people, I tell that to so many people, and they don't believe it. They don't believe it. And
you can't fix some things. There's just some things you can't fix, Flash, but I don't know what, does it sound too good to be true? Maybe, but it's a fact.
Yeah, I know.
I am a product of that education system.
It's great. It really is great. You mentioned the project labor agreements are included in this legislation. Was that difficult to accomplish? Because, there's some lawmakers, you got the right to workers out there, the conservatives say, hey, we can't go all union. What about that part?
Well, and it's not necessarily all union. If with project labor agreements, you have to agree to be signatory for the period of that job. But then we make concessions, too, on our side. There's no work stoppages and things like that. But, it was all mixing the sausage is hard. There's a lot that goes into these bills, and we had meetings at least every other week with the entire coalition, but we had a strong team of folks that were there day to day negotiating with the other partners or the other interested parties and visiting and educating the legislators in Springfield, Illinois.
Yeah.
So this didn't happen overnight. They've been working on it a long time. We've been involved for over a year now, as the LMCT has, as an organization, and I'm proud of the work they did. Some people say it didn't go far enough, but you know what? You have to open the door before you can walk through it. So.
It's funny you mentioned the sausage-making process. Imagine the sausage-making process in Washington right now when they're talking about this reconciliation bill. That's got to be monumental. But that's another story.
Yes, it is another story. But I know how that process works. I've been involved in that process, and it's not easy for the people that are there on the day-to-day activity when you're in that Capitol working on these bills. I can remember hours up to 2, 3 in the morning arguing and passing a bill on the floor and trying to get it finished and negotiating. And people think all they're doing up there is arguing. And sometimes that's what it seems like, where you hear people filibustering on the floor. Well, while they're filibustering on the floor, there's people in another room that have vested interest in this legislation trying to hash it out.
Yeah.
And get it all ready and, where it needs to be, that everybody's happy. And not everybody is going to be happy. And they always say that if nobody's happy, you must have a good bill because you negotiated it, right? If you're not all pleased with the whole thing, then you have a good piece of legislation. And that's what negotiation and compromise is all about.
I hear you. Gina, I got to take a quick break. Gina Walsh is joining us on our live line. She's Deputy Director of the Insulators, LMCT. Mechanical Insulators, LMCT.org is her website. We're talking about Climate Jobs Illinois legislation that passed, and we can thank organized labor for making it right. We'll continue our discussion. In fact, I want to touch on those charging stations. John Murphy, on behalf of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, as you know, the American Rescue Plan bailed out the multi-employer pensions. So what's going on? John Murphy is going to address that. Back in a few minutes.
This is America's Workforce. Now, back to Ed Flash Ferentz with America's Workforce.
And don't forget, we are now available on 6 different platforms. That includes Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, most recently the platform known as Stitcher. So when you get an opportunity, just sign up, receive our shows on a regular basis, and give us a rating. And we always appreciate a 5-star rating. Gina Walsh is joining us on our live line today. She's Deputy Director of the Heat and Frost Insulators, one of the many proud sponsors of America's Workforce. She's with the Labor Management Trust, Mechanical Insulators, LMCT. She's Deputy Director there. And we're talking about Climate Jobs Illinois. We talked about this with Pete Almini months ago, and the legislation has passed. And we can thank people like Gina Walsh for making sure that the labor components are in there. Prevailing wage, project labor agreements, all those good things. 900 pages in the legislation. If you don't mind, I'd like to touch on these charging stations. As you know, the legislation that they're trying to work out in Washington, the infrastructure bill, it's my understanding that will deal with the charging stations. And a lot of the automakers, I'm reading here, they want to produce 1 million electric vehicles in less than 10 years, 2030.
Yep.
we need a lot of charging stations, Gina, if that's going to be the case.
And that would be a lot of work for the IBEW and other crafts. And there's over 80, with the state rebates funding up to 80% of the charging station installation and requiring prevailing wage on that installation, that's going to be great for the trade.
Yeah.
There's, 1 million vehicles is a lot of vehicles by 2030. 2030, that sounds like an odd date. That's 8 years from now.
Right.
We are going to, and I believe one of the manufacturers, and I was shocked, I forget who it was, said they're going to be completely there within 10 or 15 years.
It's amazing.
Just announced that this week, and I don't want to put a name to it, but I was really surprised myself. It just seems to us, or somebody in my generation, so science fiction, but it isn't. This is real.
Yeah.
And this is what's going to happen if we want to save our environment. So as I said before, we can either get on the bus or be left behind, and I choose to get on the bus. I want to be part of the change.
Gina, you talked about the rulemaking process. I mean, this took a lot of hard work to get where we are today with Climate Job Illinois. And let's touch on the rulemaking process, because that can get quite complicated. Can you give us any glimpse into how that's going on now, how long it's going to go on? Go ahead.
Although Senate Bill 2408 has been signed into law, the work isn't finished. The next step is the rulemaking process, and this is a process in which executive and state agencies interpret and create rules to implement the new law. It's important that Climate Jobs Illinois Coalition remains intact and involved throughout this process, just to ensure that the law is interpreted in the spirit in which it is drafted and written. Illinois will also be considering other legislation in their session coming up right now. In the middle of their session, they're in their veto session, and I don't know if they're going to bring up what they call the EV bill, electric vehicle technology. So it's important that we remain engaged and be a part of this rulemaking. I've experienced passing a bill and it just sitting there on the shelf and the rules not being promulgated so that you can enforce the new law. You don't want that to happen, and you want to make sure that the rules are written that you're not heading down a road 3 years from now and say, wait a minute, but we took care of this issue in the Climate Jobs Illinois bill, and you find out that the rules were made up differently than what the coalition expected them to be, and it comes back to bite you because it's not done the way you need it done. But this is part of the process, and once that gets through and they've promulgated these rules, it should be good to go. And I think it's good legislation. Does it go far enough? Maybe not. Some people thinks that it goes too far. Did we get everything we wanted? Nope, you never do. And that's part of the negotiation and compromise process.
Well, Gina, you're a pro at this. You've been in the legislature. You've been on the House side, the Senate side, in the state of Missouri. Any idea? I mean, if you can give me maybe a projection on when this might be completed, when this tug of war kind of finally finishes itself off. Any idea on that?
Well, I'm a newbie when it comes to the state of Illinois, so I'm not sure how their process works, but I know it took quite a while, over a year, for them to promulgate rules in Missouri on some bills, but that was a different political makeup. And it seems to me that everybody's on board with this bill, and everybody's excited that things are moving forward, and I would look to see that the state would move rapidly to meet all their goals, because like I told you, all privately owned coal generation to close by 2030, municipally owned coal plants to reach zero carbon emissions by 2045, with a 45% reduction by 2035. So they have some hard and fast dates here.
Yeah.
So they have to get moving because, folks need to know what they're up against and what they need to do to stay viable in this industry.
Yeah. And it does give them an opportunity to get trained for the new jobs that are going to emerge here. There's no question there.
Exactly.
Another question here. Climate Jobs Illinois. Well, there's a lot of other states out there. I'm wondering, is this the first of its kind? And I'm just wondering if other states are knocking on the door saying, this is something that we have to do.
There are other coalitions across the country. Climate Jobs it's a national resource center, and there is a coalition. I know in New York, I believe in Connecticut there is one. There's 4 or 5 coalitions across the country, and they've had some successes in those coalitions as well.
Have they had successes like you had in Illinois,
no,
though?
They have not had successes like, I don't believe that the labor standards are as strong as the successes that have happened in Illinois.
Gotcha.
So we're pretty proud of the legislation.
Well, you should be. You should be. This is monumental. It is really great. Really great. Well, I'll tell you what. We're going to wrap it up on that note. It's good to hear from you. It's good to see that you're working hard and you're seeing some fruits of your labor here. So let's do this conversation again and find out, especially when the rules, when you see some solid rulemaking going on and making sure that everything is contained in the bill as you wrote it. Let's do that in, I don't know, maybe 4, 5, 6 months down the road. How's that sound?
Okay, as we wrote it. It takes a lot of people to get this stuff done.
That's right. Hey, one more question here. I know you got to run, but any craziness going on in the state of Missouri, like right to workers trying to introduce new legislation? Because I know it was overwhelmingly defeated some years back. Anything on that?
Not right now, but December 1st is when pre-filing of bills begin, and I'm sure that there will be some anti-worker bills filed here in the state, but there's a good coalition of folks in Jefferson City, Missouri, that are going to work hard to make sure that they don't go anywhere. Very good.
Very good. They always pop up, don't they?
Yes, they do, and they always will when you have term limits.
Yep. All right, we're going to leave it there. Gina Walsh, Deputy Director of the Insulators, LMCT. You can find more at Mechanical Insulators, lmct.org. Great news out of the state of Illinois. Climate Jobs Illinois passes, and the rule-making process is currently underway. You take care, stay safe, and we'll talk down the road, all right?
All right, thanks for having me.